There are literally hundreds of weapons in Elden Ring, and all of them can be viable. However, there are a few that are just genuinely a cut above the rest and are absolutely top tier. And if you're beginning a run for the first time, or you're jumping back into the game after a while on a brand new character, I'm going to show you the 20 best weapons you can get very early in the game, as these are top tier weapons that you can pretty much get at the start of your playthrough. I'm going to show you what these weapons are, and I'm going to show you exactly where they're located and how to get them. These range from being able to pick them up 5 minutes into your new playthrough, or you do have to venture through the map a little bit to get a couple of these others, but all of these weapons can be acquired before you even touch the DLC or the end game content. So these weapons have a wide range of use cases, so I tried to give you some options that if you're not liking a certain weapon for whatever reason, there are plenty of others to choose from. So with that being said, let's get into it. Okay, number 20 is going to be the Bloodhound's Fang. This is one of the earliest weapons you can get, period, in Elden Ring, and it's actually very easy to access. This can be found over here in Limgrave, slightly south of where you first initially spawn in, and it's actually found in this Everjail just right north of it. When you go from this side of Grace up to this Everjail, you can enter it, and you will have an enemy to defeat. Upon defeating that enemy, you will acquire the Bloodhound's Fang. Keep in mind, this does have strength and dexterity requirements, 17 and 18 respectively, so you will need to level up a little bit to order to wield this properly. If you don't, then you're not going to be doing very much damage, so make sure you have those requirements before you try to use this weapon. But this is also a special weapon, meaning you need somber smithing stones to upgrade it. Its Ash of War ability or skill is baked into the weapon, so it cannot be changed, but Bloodhound's Finesse is a pretty decent ability, all things considered. It does fair stance damage, although it can be kind of awkward to use sometimes, but the weapon itself, just from its light attacks and its heavy attacks, can be absolutely amazing, and it's one of the best early game dexterity weapons, period. Number 19 is the Moonveil Katana. This is also found fairly early in the game. You will have to venture out of Limgrave and head over to Caelid. However, this weapon can be found in the Gale Tunnel that is at the beginning of Caelid. So if you enter this cave just down here, you should be able to push all the way down, and then you get to the boss door arena, and you should find a Magma Worm boss. Upon defeating him, he will drop the Moonveil Katana. Keep in mind, this is a really good weapon for dexterity and intelligence-based builds, as the magic slice you get out of this scales directly off intelligence, and it also does really great with stuff like Rolana's Cameo's Talisman, and that's something you'll get later in the DLC if you continue that far. But this is an amazing weapon overall, as it does passive bleed, and you also have a projectile in the form of that magic slice. It doesn't have the biggest range for a katana, but that's usually okay, because in this case you have a projectile to compensate, but it is one of the best weapons in the game overall still. Number 18 is the Reduvia. This is a really early weapon you can get as well. You just simply need to head down into this trench inside of Limgrave, and you can fight this NPC that will automatically invade you. He's also pretty easy to kill, and once he's dead, he'll simply drop you the Reduvia. Now, keep in mind, this is an arcane-based dagger, and I will say that it does get outclassed by later weapons in the game. I wouldn't necessarily keep this forever, but it is still a pretty great early game weapon, because you'll get to take significant advantage of bleed. It does have a projectile technically that you throw. It doesn't have the best range in terms of that, but it also has very low stat requirements, so you can use this almost right off the bat. It's a very easy early weapon to get, and I would recommend this if you're going for a bleed build specifically, like if you use the samurai class off the bat. This is a very solid early game weapon. Number 17 is the Grafted Blade Greatsword. This is, once again, another very early weapon you can get in Elden Ring, as if you go to the southernmost part of the map in the Weeping Peninsula, you should find Castle Morn, but exploring the castle itself will not give you the weapon. You actually need to venture through and go behind the castle, as there's a whole, drop down where there's a beach, and the boss that is carrying this weapon can be found behind this fog wall, the Leone Misbegotten. And the Grafted Blade Greatsword is a really good weapon in the game. However, I will say it has a few downsides. Number one is that its stat requirement for how early you can get it on in the game is pretty tough, because it requires 40 strength to be able to wield. So this is something that, even though you can get it early, you might not be able to use it for quite a while unless you're just dumping every single point you get into strength, and even then it might take a little bit. The weapon skill Oath of Vengeance is pretty good. You get about an entire minute of granted 5 points to all attributes while this is active. You do also get super armor for the first 5 seconds after you initiate this. Unfortunately, it doesn't last the whole minute, but it is a decent one to throw out if you think you're going to take a big hit or something, or if you're going to trade some damage. But overall, this is a fantastic weapon. It just has some pretty big requirements, but if you're going into an all-strength build, this is maybe one to put in your inventory early. Number 16 is the Sword of Night and Flame. Now, in order to acquire this, admittedly, it does require you to at least venture out of Limgrave. You'll get this in the second area if you access Liurnia of the Lakes, and this one can be found in Caria Manor, which is all the way up north. But if you go to this side of Grace here, I'm going to show you exactly where this is found in this area because it's kind of hidden. Accessing it just requires you to do a little bit of a jump down puzzle here in order to access this more secret room, but once you acquire it, the Sword of Night and Flame is one of the most unique weapons in the game, and I would only advise it for very specific builds. Now, if you begin Elden Ring and you pick the Confessor as your starting class, luckily this class actually meets the base handling requirements right away, so that as you level up, by the time you reach this weapon, you've probably gotten a bit stronger and can use this more effectively. But because of the sword's poor strength scaling, I honestly wouldn't recommend using this if you're going with a strength build, and two-handing it doesn't really seem to do much better either. However, poising it in the skill stance has two unique abilities. You can use your R1 and do sort of like a mini Comet Azure, this giant magic burst that scales off your intelligence, or you can do a wide radius Flame Slash, and this is a really solid option, I think, especially for, tons of enemies and fighting multiple targets at once. And the Comet Azure is good for dumping out damage onto a specific stationary boss where you're not in any immediate trouble. The weapon's physical abilities honestly are not the best, so if you're just trying to, dump out melee damage, I would avoid this weapon because it really needs to be able to use its skills properly to utilize this to its full potential. But it can be a little bit of a niche build, especially if you're going only into intelligence and faith. This might be a good option, but otherwise there might be some better weapons out there for you. Okay, number 15 are the Raptor Talons. Now, you acquire these in the Altus Plateau, which does require you to open up a couple of areas in the game. It's not the earliest weapon you can acquire, but it's also not the latest. Now, it can be found over here in the Sage's Tunnel, and if you start from this side of Grace right when you come up from Liurnia, or you can head back down this way if you took the Dectus lift up to Altus. Now, when you make it to the Sage's Tunnel, you pretty much just need to hang right the entire time, as this cave has a bunch of illusory walls that you'll need to either attack or roll through to open them up. And I would also strongly recommend either a torch or a lantern, because otherwise it's pretty much impossible to see in here. But the Raptor Talons can be found in a chest that's just beyond this crowd of skeletons. And these are insane because two-handing and or power stancing weapons is highly advised in this game, but that also requires you to generally upgrade two different weapons of the same type if they don't automatically power stance, something like the Star Scourge Greatsword, for example, but the Raptor Talons do. So that means you only need to upgrade it once, meaning it's a pretty cheap investment as far as weapons go. And if you're going into a dexterity build, this is easily one of the best weapons in the game, as you can dump out very fast damage. Now, obviously with these light slashes, you aren't doing a ton of stance, but the charged heavies on the Raptor Talons do kind of make up for that. These can be buffed as well, which is a huge benefit. So you can either add Blood Flame Blade or even Black Flame just to get a little bit more extra damage up front. However, keep in mind, despite these doing passive bleed buildup, it does not scale off Arcane, so don't waste your points on that trying to get more out of it. Number 14 is the Misericord, and this can be found actually in Godric's area once you've entered Stormvale Castle. I'm going to show you the route to get here. It's actually pretty easy. You will need one Stone Sword key though for this, so just keep that in mind. But if you jump down here and then head through this tunnel, you can kind of go around this right side, and there should be a window here to where you can jump down. There's a few ways into this room, but I actually think this is one of the easier ways to get here. But when you open this room with the Stone Sword key, the weapon can be found just around the other side of this corner, and this is a dagger. However, it is buffable, it's infusible, and I would highly recommend it. It's got a great moveset. It has very, very low stat requirements. It's primarily scaling off strength and dexterity, and that's good and everything. Like, it doesn't do a ton of stance damage, obviously, just from regular attacking, but what really makes this weapon special and why I recommend it is its critical damage. It gets the highest critical bonus scaling in the entire game. There are certain weapons that deal extra than normal 100 critical. Something like Morgoth's Curse Sword, instead of the normal 100, will deal deal 110, and this actually does 140 of critical. So if you can consistently get stance breaks and you set up yourself to get criticals on bosses, it's going to be an unbelievable multiplier, and you can pair this with certain talismans to get even more critical damage when you do get them. It's amazing. Number 13, we have the Rusted Anchor, which is a top tier weapon that can be found in basically the starting area of Elden Ring. You can get it over here in the Morn Tunnel, which you need to access the Weeping Peninsula area first, but when you get to this tunnel here, you need to go all the way down and get to the end and clear the boss of this area. After killing this Misbegotten, he will drop the Rusted Anchor, and this weapon does have some, I guess, fairly chunky requirements, right, at 26 strength, which is a little bit high for an early game weapon, so you might have to hang on to it for a little bit. But once you have access to it, this can be one of the best weapons in the whole game. This weapon is upgraded through regular smithing stones, which means it's upgradable and can be buffed. And I would also advise something that swings quickly like Wild Strikes as the Ash of War, as you can essentially just out DPS the enemy you're fighting. The Great Axes really don't do as much stance damage as you might imagine, but it kind of doesn't matter when you're outputting numbers like this. Not only is it easy to acquire, but it's also very easy to use and can pretty much be a top tier weapon throughout your entire playthrough. Number 12 is the Star Scourge Greatsword. Now, admittedly, it's not my favorite greatsword option in the game, but what I recommend about it is that it is pretty easy to get fairly early on. It just requires you beating General Radahn and Caelid, but this can be done, I guess, pretty early in your playthrough. But what it really is good for is not only giving you a little bit of a taste of some of the boss weapons, but it also kind of shows you the basics of power stancing if you've never really messed with that too much. And the good thing is that you don't need two Star Scourge Greatswords to do it. You can put one in your right hand and then two-hand it and or power stance them, and you have two swords. This might be a good option if you're running the new Idis Knight character in the Tarnished Edition DLC, as if you're running a strength and intelligence based build, and in particular the weapon skill Starcaller Cry can be unbelievable for not only damage but also stance. It does take a while for this to come out, so it's a very committal move. Interestingly though, the initial hit of the Starcaller Cry actually scales off of Roar, so if you have something like the Roar Medallion or the Highland Axe, you can buff it with that. Number 11 is Rivers of Blood. This is acquired admittedly a little bit later on as you enter the mountaintop of the Giants area, and its location I'm going to show you right here starting from this side of Grace. You simply need to head up past this section of enemies and then go up towards the church that's over here on the top of the hill. Once you arrive there, then you'll be invaded by the Bloody Finger Okina, and once you kill him, he will drop Rivers of Blood. Now, you probably already know about this weapon, especially if you played Elden Ring in its first year. It was probably the best weapon in the game. It has been adjusted since then. It's been nerfed a handful of times, but I will say it's still, despite all of the nerfs, one of the best weapons overall, and is an incredibly viable weapon if you're going for a pure dexterity build or one with arcane. Keep in mind, not only does it deal pure bleed, but it also does split damage into fire. It can be one of those weapons when spamming the weapon skill can drain your FP pretty quickly, so I'd recommend either kind of splitting more into your FP bar or just carrying more flasks, because you'll run out pretty quickly if you're using this. It's a really good weapon skill. It's actually fantastic, but it will be kind of costly after a bit. Once again, this is a somewhat later weapon to acquire than many I've put on this list, but because of its fairly low requirements, you should be able to use it just fine when you get it, and it does upgrade off of Somber Smithing Stones. Number 10 is going to be Ordovis's Greatsword, which is found in the Orizes Hero's Grave in the Altus Plateau. This is a fairly challenging place to navigate once you get down here, but you need to make your way all the way down into the dungeon and defeat the final boss of this area, which are the two Crucible Knights, and defeating both of them will give you Ordovis's Greatsword. The reason this is so good is it's not just the best physical greatsword in the game, it's really not. It's actually its weapon skill, which is truly genuinely broken, and it really took me playing Night Rain to come back to normal Elden Ring to really just appreciate how good this is. Now, I typically don't go for split holy damage weapons. There are so many of them in the game, and while they're not completely terrible, many of the bosses, in the base game at least, are resistant to holy. But on the other side of that coin, a lot of the enemies in the DLC are weak to holy, making this a pretty good option for the DLC if you're going to be bringing already a strength faith-based build. This is a very solid option, but really it's the Ordovis's Vortex that makes this weapon completely broken. Not only is the weapon skill incredibly cheap to use, meaning it's very efficient and you don't need a large FP bar to take advantage of it, but you will need to fully charge this because you will get the most amount of stance damage out of that. But because this has some super armor, that means in some instances you're probably going to take a hit as this move is coming out. So really, instead of going more into FP, you might as well go into HP just to trade that hit. Unfortunately, it cannot be buffed or infused, but it doesn't really need it if you're utilizing this weapon skill properly. Number 9 is going to be the Death's Poker. This can be acquired pretty early as well, as soon as you have access to Caelid. Now, the conditions in order for this to spawn are a little bit unique. You need to go to at least probably this site of graces pretty close by in this Dragon Communion Church, and you'll want to change the time to nightfall. Once it's nighttime, and only when it's nighttime, you can come out here and then go down the trail a little bit and you should see a Deathrite bird. Upon killing this Deathrite bird, you'll be given the Death's Poker Greatsword. Now, despite it not really looking all that impressive, to be honest, it has one of the best weapon skills in the game, and the Ghost Flame Ignition is seriously broken. The weapon skill does pure magic damage, so don't be afraid to go all in on magic and scaling up intelligence. It also gets buffed off the Spellblade set if you're wearing that armor. So that is something that you'll want to take advantage of because admittedly, the physicality of the weapon is not the best. Its actual charged heavies and its damage output as just a physical weapon could be a lot better. But if you're going purely into a strength or intelligence based build, this is one of the best early game weapons you can get, and is something that is just top tier amongst the entire roster. Number 8 is going to be the Scavenger's Curved Sword. Now, this is not my favorite curved sword in the game, but we'll talk about a special one a little bit later. However, the Scavenger's Curved Sword can be acquired after you've accessed Mount Gelmir, which is, I guess, a little bit midway through the game. It's not the earliest weapon you can get, but it can be found over here just past this bridge, and a grafted scion will drop down, and when you kill him, you can freely come over here and pick up this item, which is the Scavenger's Curved Sword. Now, the way to really utilize this properly, in my opinion, is power stancing them. Unfortunately, you can only get one per playthrough. So if you pick it up in your first run and then you do a New Game Plus playthrough, when you get your second curved sword, you can power stance these and then you can start really taking advantage of the moveset and absolutely dumping out damage. Number 7 is going to be Morgoth's Cursed Sword. It's one of my personal favorites in the entire game, and it has a lot of really interesting properties. This is a curved greatsword, and it's pretty much the Bloodhound's Fang's bigger brother. I would say that it pretty much outclasses that in just about every way. It has an amazing weapon skill. It has incredible range because the sword is so long, one of the biggest hitboxes there is, and it also gets extra critical damage if you do land one of these strikes. It's a 110, so it's not quite like the Misericord, but it is still excellent for getting criticals, and the weapon skill is a really good option for like closing the gap to bosses. It's one of those things that kind of like breaks the rules of movement. If you approach a boss and they kind of jump away or something, this can be something that really pressures the boss, and you can get a lot of stance breaks just by doing this. Not only does this flame also get fire damage and passive bleed, but it does a decent amount of stance damage for what it is. To obtain it, you simply need to defeat Morgoth over here in the capital and then bring his soul over to the Twin Maidens and acquire his power from the Remembrance. Number 6, we have the Star Fist. These are fist weapons, of course, and a lot of these can be kind of overlooked, but this one in particular I think is easily the best option because not only can you get it really easily, as soon as you enter Leyndell, you can kind of make your way through the town, and once you get sort of close to the Golden Shade Godfrey location, you can actually just go to the opposite side instead, go all the way up this hill, and then to the back of this building, and then inside these pillars, you should see an item, and you can pick those up, and those will be the Star Fist. What makes these weapons so good is, yes, it's a fist weapon, so you can swing them really quickly. Yes, they're spiked, so it has passive bleed, but really it's the charged heavies you can do from these that is the real secret sauce. The fist weapons usually have some of the quickest movesets, but also some of the best charged heavies in the entire game period. They come out extremely fast and deal a just staggering amount of stance damage. It's crazy, and the Star Fists are no different. So not only are you getting passive bleed out of this, but you're also also constantly knocking down enemies for criticals, and if you pair this with something to get extra critical damage, you can really take advantage of it. It is buffable, which is also really nice, so you can put on something like Blood Flame Blade or, again, even Black Flame. The only real downside to speak of is that they have next to no range because they're obviously fist weapons, so you need to be getting very close to your enemies, and that can be a problem for some bosses, but for the most part, you should be able to counteract that with these stance breaks that you'll be getting. Number 5 is the Godslayer Greatsword. This is actually one of my personal favorite weapons in the entire game, and I love a good greatsword. This one can be a little bit tricky to get. While you can technically get it in an early area, the way you need to find it can be somewhat challenging, as this is located at the bottom of the Divine Tower of Caelid. So you can enter this by kind of parkouring onto the side here, and you essentially need to parkour to this area all the way up, get the grace, and then you need to go through the tunnel, and then you need to parkour all the way down to the bottom. It can be tricky to get down here safely, but there is a route down, and once you get to the bottom, there should be another grace, and then you can go through this hallway into the fog wall and then fight the boss, which is a Godskin Apostle. Upon killing him, you can go into the room behind him, and then there in the treasure chest will be the Godslayer Greatsword. This is one of the best strength faith options in the whole game, and I absolutely love the weapon skill. Admittedly, it's not the best, I just really like it. You get the Queen's Black Flame, and this basically comes out as a two-part swing. You get the initial startup of the swing, which can interrupt some moves, but it's the second and third swing that you'll get out of it that really deal the damage out. And it actually has a little bit more range than you would probably expect for a weapon like this, meaning that even if enemies try to back away, you can still generally get that second hit in for incredible damage. Unfortunately, the normal weapon swings don't get the black flame applied, so you're not going to get that damage over time with these, but its actual light swing is one of the fastest in its weapon class, so it's still perfectly viable just to use as a melee weapon when you don't want to commit to that admittedly pretty long weapon skill, but despite that, it can be one of the highest damaging weapons overall, and it's also very easy to get. Number 4 is Mohg's Sacred Spear, and this is probably the latest game weapon that we're going to be acquiring on this list. However, it is still one of the best weapons in the whole game, and you can acquire it before endgame and the DLC. Matter of fact, you will acquire this weapon just before you get access to the DLC itself. Now, what makes the Mohgwyn Spear so good is that it has some unique properties that really allow you to take advantage of certain situations. So, for example, the weapon skill Blood Boon Ritual is just, it's straight up broken. I mean, you can absolutely delete rooms, and it's not even the most expensive thing to cast. Like, you obviously need some FP to consistently do this, and I would recommend having a pretty high health bar because it's a very committal move, and you will probably trade damage at some point. But if you can kind of eat 1 or 2 hits, you will pretty much kill whatever is attacking you, or at least dealing significant enough damage that you can back off and kind of reset. But even better is that after using the weapon skill, it's just going to straight up buff the weapon so that you can go back to fighting regularly as well and do just fine. You're going to get a lot of passive bleed out of this, and it's just an overall great weapon despite it being somewhat later in the game, but you can still take this into the DLC or the late game if you want. Number 3 is going to be the Ujigatana, which is a very early weapon you can acquire. You simply need to go down to exactly the trench where we acquired the Reduvia, and you just need to go about 20 feet forward, and you're going to see an NPC right here that you just need to kill. Keep in mind, this will prevent his quest from completing, so you do need to take that into account, but killing him will grant you the Nagikiba. You can also get this later if you do complete his quest and a few other various methods, but if you want it right away, I recommend just killing him. The reason this weapon is so powerful is its unique properties. The most important thing is the weapon's incredible range. As you can see, it's a very long sword, meaning you can be out of the range of a lot of a boss's fast options and you can still be able to hit them. That might not sound like a lot or very important, but it makes a huge difference. It does have a slightly higher stamina cost than something like the Ujigatana, but I would also say that it's just a higher risk, higher reward weapon. And because it has passive bleed, I usually like to put on something like Spinning Slash or even Dancing Blade and then infuse it with like Occult so I can get tons and tons of arcane scaling off of the bleed. Like, it's good as a physical weapon too, and just again, because of its range, you can still dish out lots of physical, but also its bleed buildup. If you go into an Occult infusion or something that swings quickly, you're going to be getting just absolutely staggering amounts of bleed. I would say that it is the best dexterity-based weapon, period, that you can get early in Elden Ring. Coming in at number 2, we have the good old classic vanilla greatsword. This is, once again, just like the Nagakiba, pretty easy to acquire. This just requires you going over to Venture in Caelid, and if you go from this side of Grace, it's pretty much right at the center of the entrance of Caelid, you can go over here past this crowd, and then over here to where these dog birds are, and then inside this chariot in this treasure chest will be the greatsword. This is honestly going to be just the pure best strength-based build in the game, especially if you acquire the greatsword, fully upgrade it, and go into a heavy infusion and two-hand the weapon. There's really not much else in the game that can compare in just terms of pure physical damage. Obviously, if you go into something like that, it's a pretty one-note kind of build, but if you're just going for pure strength, this will outclass the Grafted Blade greatsword, and it also has lower requirements than that weapon. And that's on top of the fact that the weapon can also be buffed with Blood Flame Blade or Magic or Frost or something. Just like the Nagakiba being my absolute pick for just a pure dexterity based weapon that's early, I would also recommend the normal greatsword for a pure strength based build. Before we get to our number 1 spot, I do want to mention the Bandit's Curved Sword, as it is my favorite curved sword to power stance because the jumping attacks are absolutely ridiculous. The only unfortunate thing is, despite the fact that you can get this in an early area, there's no guaranteed way to pick it up. You actually have to farm it out of enemies in this region, which is kind of unfortunate. But if you really want to, I would farm these, and the Bandit's Curved Sword, when you buff them, give them an infusion, and power stance them, can give you some of the highest damage numbers in the entire game. You wouldn't think it just by looking at it. It's a kind of unassuming weapon, but they are genuinely ridiculous. But finally, coming in at number 1 is the Blasphemous Blade, and this can be acquired in the Volcano Manor section after defeating Rykard. And when you get his soul, you can redeem it for his remembrance and get this sword. A lot of people thought this was going to get nerfed in the Tarnished Edition update, but it doesn't look like it did, and it is still the king of PvE. Obviously, what makes this weapon so powerful is that it not only is a great sword with just decent physical damage and a good moveset, but the weapon skill Taker's Flames is just... it's straight up broken. You get HP back upon killing enemies, making it a good weapon just to explore with and take care of, lots of crowds, but it's also a good boss weapon because the flames themselves have a really good range. You do get a decent amount of super armor upon the startup, and also the fire damage you get, particularly off faith scaling, is just dumb. You can buff this further with the Warrior Jar Shard or the Fire Scorpion Talisman. I will say this, it is unequivocally the best weapon in the game, but if you don't want to trivialize the entire game of Elden Ring, I would maybe try something else, because the Blasphemous Blade is that thing in the pocket that is obviously just, it's going to just shred everything you put it up against. But if you want to try something else and maybe challenge yourself a little more, I wouldn't necessarily reach for this because this can trivialize a lot of the game's encounters. And it's not the earliest weapon to acquire, so I would recommend trying some other things first before you even go after getting this one down. But anyways, guys, that's it. Those are the 20 best early game weapons you can get in Elden Ring. If you haven't checked out my ultimate guide and want to learn more, I recommend go watch that video. It's linked in the description. And make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. I would really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Enjoy the game, and I'll see you later. Peace.